Everybody, I'll call this meeting of the Delta Township Board to order. Will the board members and guests please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Trustee Mojica? Here. Trustee Cascarella?
Present.
Trustee Brewer?
Present.
Trustee Bowen?
Here.
Treasurer Fedewa?
Here.
Clerk Clark is present. Supervisor Fletcher?
I am here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. We have the agenda before us. Any additions or deletions? Not a motion to approve.
So moved.
What? Oops. I called for
Since the mask, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
I move we accept the agenda as presented.
Support.
It's been moved and supported that we accept the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Public hearings. We'll open the public hearing now on the hearing of necessity for the Stoll Road streetlights. So now is your opportunity, if you'd like to speak for or against that, to come forward. If you would like to speak, just step up to the podium here, state your name and your address for the record, and share your views with us. So the public hearing is now open on the Stoll Road streetlights. Welcome.
Hello, board. How are you?
Good to see you.
It's good to see you guys as well. I'm Barb Poma. I live at 433 Stoll Road.
And I'm Cheryl Farhat. I live at 419 Stoll Road, and we are the two that circulated the petition.
We've had discussions we've been very fortunate to have a lot of young families move into our little dead-end street. And we love having the younger kids back on the street and a lot more activity. But we have noticed also that because we're a dead-end street and people fail to read that it's a no outlet sign, traffic seems to be moving pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so we've had more and more concerns about safety. I know that we don't want streetlights on every single pole. We don't want to be the runway.
Yeah.
But we do hope that the board would consider maybe every other streetlight, or I'm not sure how that process works.
The board determines in order to meet the illumination, what goes where? The Board of Water and Light.
Well, I've been looking at, I know North and South Dibble just got streetlights not too long ago. And on North Dibble, it seems like they're every other pole, but on South, it's almost every power pole. So I don't know how that was determined. I don't want it to look like a runway either where it's over illuminated that the neighbors, because there are a few neighbors that don't want lights. So I want to be sensitive to them as well, but I have safety concerns like Barb. I've lived on that street for 41 years and cars just ram through there all hours of the night, and it's a safety issue. We've had some break-ins. There'll be other neighbors maybe talking about that, or scary situations where people pound on their doors at night. So if there's more light, then hopefully that would help that concern.
Yes. So thank you for your time tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Barb.
Thanks.
Anybody else would like to speak this evening?
Hi, I'm Christy Pavlik. This is my husband, Andrew Pavlik. We live at 331. We're the second from last house on the street. And we are I think referring to, we had an interesting encounter about a week and a half ago now, where 5 o'clock in the morning, a young man pounded on our door, jolted us awake. We thought it was our son that had locked himself out. So we opened the door and it wasn't. It was somebody screaming that they had mace in their eyes. By the time we shut the door, I said, I'll call the cops for you. He said, I'll go get you water. The guy had left. The police did come and search and did not see him. So we have a safety concern there. Our car has been broken into twice, I think, since we lived there in about 20 years.
20 years. Yeah.
But we also have we have interesting neighbors. We have at least 2 families of deer that live in the woods right next to us. And they take over it's the oddest thing. We're in a suburb. They come out all day, but they're deer, so they come out a lot at night. And there's babies all the time. So that's also a concern, is just people, but also cars coming down and not being able to see the deer is you wouldn't think it would be, but they're in our backyard, they're in our neighbor's backyard a lot, and they do tend to go up the road into the neighboring subdivisions for some reason, so.
And also, our son actually walks to work, so, and he has a late shift because he works at a restaurant. So when he's coming home, it's pitch black by the time he can get down our street. So it's just another concern. And of course, he's got to wear all black in the kitchen where he's at, so it's,
Thank you.
right, thank you.
Thanks for being here. Anybody else would like to speak this evening at the hearing?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Adams. I live together with my husband at 518 Stoll Road, which, if you're looking at the parcel map, compared to those who've spoken already, is more in the middle of the block. They came, expressed an interest in having the streetlights. I'm one of those who's not interested in having a streetlight. I have a utility pole right at the end of my driveway. I don't want a streetlight at the end of my driveway. Based on the illumination that's present in the area of the street where we live, we're already using blackout curtains in our home so that it's dark enough for us to sleep. Our neighbors have their porch light on all night. All around us, our neighbor across the street has a barn light. In our area of the street, it's, to my mind, sufficiently lit. However, the other night I did go out, 10:30 at night, to get an idea what my neighbors were talking about. Walking the length of the street, the lighting is very unevenly distributed. Up by St. Joe and Stoll, the housing faces St. Joe. So that illumination is going towards St. Joe, which gives us kind of a dark entry onto the street. Then you have houses that face each other through the middle of the road. That's pretty well lit along there. Starting at about 425, the parcels change so that there's housing that faces the street up one side, and the other parcels are backing onto the street from the other neighborhood. There's also a berm that goes along there. It's wooded. So you have a situation where there's only light on one side of the street. All the utility poles are on the other side of the street where there's not, forward-facing housing. And so those areas are quite dark. So I had marked down, based on the utility poles, because I've also observed, as they've referenced, people blast down there. They think it's a through street. They think they're getting a shortcut from the construction on Waverly. I don't know what they think. They go really fast. They get down to the end. They do a screeching turnaround and they zip back. Even 10:30 on Saturday when I was down there, there were deer also. The deer love that drainage area. But anyway, I was thinking that if we did one street light at the end of the turnaround, that illuminates that keyhole turnaround. Skip up to about 333, house number 333, the utility pole across from there, illumination, and then 425 for the other light. And then you're back to houses that are facing each other, some of which already have motion lights, lower level poled lighting in the front of their yard out toward the street that I think would give enough light that we wouldn't need, as they've said, the runway effect of the utility poles. So I would advocate for some lights, but not 13 lights. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one thing, just maybe for like a different conversation or meeting, but when it comes to the traffic, the car traffic, I think what would be much more effective than lighting for that issue would be adding a speed bump or two. It's not through the street, and anyone of us that knows that lives on the street, that knows that it's there, would be going a reasonable speed, but anyone who's maybe trying to like blast down the street would get a shock to their shocks. So I don't know I can talk to Barbara, maybe that's something else we want to consider, but yeah, I agree with my wife. A couple of lights in specific spots would be cool, but not too much.
Thanks for being here. And as Clerk Clark said, the actual placement will be determined by the Board of Water and Light. And as far as the speed bumps go, the Eaton County Road Commission doesn't place speed bumps on roads. They don't like how it impacts their snow plows in the winter, so they generally will not put those when they're requested.
Could I ask a follow-up question then?
Sure.
If the Board of Water Light is responsible, so it's 100% up to their discretion where they would put them? So if you guys approve streetlights for our street, at that point, we would have no more say over where they would be placed?
I'll speak with the board that even the petition circulators are looking, I don't know what the 13 poles are. I'll see and have Gary meet me out there with a couple of you about what 13 means.
It's all the utility poles.
Yeah, there's evenly spaced 13 utility poles from St. Joe all the way to the end of the road.
But they are required, if they put streetlights in, that it's all illuminated. So they do these lights with circles and they have to overlap, so. But I will speak to him and share that. And it can also be controlled by the wattage they put on.
Anybody else in the audience would like to speak during the public hearing? Welcome.
One quick thing. My name's Shirley Fandrick. I'm at the 333 Stoll Road. So towards the end, and in addition to the traffic, we're obviously towards the woods. There is an open fence that has access to the townhomes that are off of Michigan. And there's an empty lot, basically, with no home that has access to Chesley. So we get a ton of foot traffic down there at all hours of the day and night, that people are just cutting through, or things are going on in the woods, or whatever. And for us, it is very dark down there, and that's, granted, I can't stand the traffic, it's a dead-end street, please, people, stop. But it's the foot traffic too, at all hours. People have no business being there, and again, I think the lights would help in that respect. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anybody else in the audience would like to speak?
Hello, my name is Andrew Bailey. I'm at 512 Stoll Road. I'm in support of the lights. It's a safety concern. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old daughter at home. And as they grow up, I want them to be in a safe neighborhood. I believe the absence of lights in our neighborhood fosters an environment that's conducive to potential violence and crime. And I just don't want to see that in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anybody else in the audience would like to speak? Last chance. Anybody would like to speak? Okay, we'll see nobody coming forward. We'll close the public hearing now. Madam Clerk, would you like to make a motion?
I would. I will share with you also, just for information's sake, 75% of the property owners signed the petition for streetlights, which is very high. That's way above our typical streetlight response. So I move that the Delta Township Board declare its intent to proceed with the installation of streetlights in the district known as Stoll Road. Further, the board declares that sufficient petitions were submitted to proceed with said improvements. Further, that the board approve the plans and estimate costs for the proposed project. Further, the Board of Trustees hereby approves the said special assessment district and determines that the terms of its existence shall be in perpetuity. Further, the supervisor is directed to prepare a special assessment roll for the said special assessment district, which shall be filed with the township clerk. Further, that the public hearing for the objections to the special assessment roll is set for September 20th, 2021 at 6 p.m. at the Delta Township Administration Building. Further, costs may be increased by the utility company over time to reflect increases in electrical rates. Further, the clerk is directed to publish notice of the public hearing in the newspaper and notify the affected property owners. The clerk shall notify all property owners that they must appeal at the public hearing or file a written protest objecting to said special assessment in order to further appeal to the Michigan Tax Tribunal.
Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Is there discussion?
Yes, usually we have the estimated cost, and I didn't see that. I don't know if I missed it somewhere, but can you provide that, Mary, so that everybody's clear on what that is?
It's $68.71 per year. $68.71 a year is anticipated.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Clerk Clark is yes. Trustee Bowen?
Yes.
Trustee Brewer?
Yes.
Trustee Cascarella?
Yes.
Trustee Mohica?
Yes.
Treasurer Fedewa?
Yes.
Supervisor Fletcher?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thank you all for coming this evening to speak on this issue. In your packet, you'll see a communication from Tetra Tech, an update on the wastewater treatment plant project. Now we'll move to public comment for any item. It says on the agenda, items not on the agenda, but you're free to speak on any topic this evening, whether it be on the agenda or not. So is there anybody here in the audience who would like to speak this evening? Looks like everybody's leaving, so we will continue on with our agenda here. The next up is the consent agenda. What's the pleasure of the board on the items on our consent agenda?
Supervisor Fletcher, point of
Yes.
order.
Sure.
I'm looking at the consent agenda, and there's a number, 8 items, and at least one of them is an expenditure, an authorization to expend money. Do we need to have a roll call vote on that?
Well, the consent agenda is considered a roll call vote.
But on that specifically, I think traditionally we've always done that individually.
We've done other things, like, one of the things is spending money every month on the consent agenda. We approve all the bills every month.
Well,
And it is a roll call vote that we're taking, like, depending on the consent. It can be pulled and voted on separately.
no, I was saying because it's a contract, as
Right.
well, so it's just.
Yeah, we've approved contracts on the consent as well. But it can be pulled.
No, I don't want to pull it, I was just trying to get a, clarification, that's all.
Okay. Anybody like to make a motion? Andrea?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Support.
It's been moved and supported to approve the consent agenda as presented. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Cascarella?
Yes.
Treasurer Fedewa?
Yes.
Trustee Mohica?
Yes.
Trustee Brewer?
Yes.
Trustee Bowen?
Yes.
Clerk Clark is yes. Supervisor Fletcher?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Unfinished business, I don't think that there's anything have changed there.
Supervisor Fletcher, I would like to request that staff provide an update at the next committee of the whole on this to see where we are in negotiations with the property.
Sure. Yep, if the proper staff is here, I don't see planning staff though, so I'm not
Okay.
sure if there's anybody here to give a report.
I thought it's
Well,
just,
at the next committee of the
Oh,
whole.
at the next, I thought.
Yeah,
that-
so give them time to
Okay, yep,
prepare.
Gotcha, okay.
An update
Yep.
on what? For clarity.
Discussions, I guess, with the theater.
Oh,
We had,
Thank
yeah,
you.
we had tabled it so that they could go back and talk about the terms of the special use permit.
Absolutely. So moving down now to items of business, and first up is item number 10, the award the contract for the sheriff's substation. And Ernie, do you want to present this request and others, if you like, on the staff?
Thank you Supervisor Fletcher, board members, good evening. Just a pretty detailed memo for you in the package. This is kind of the next step in terms of the sheriff's office project. I've got a couple of guests here tonight. Amy Scobie from Crispin, who's also a Delta Township resident, is going to be here to represent Crispin, and then Dennis Jensen from C2AE, who is their consultant architect. The chronology of it is pretty detailed, but I'll kind of focus on March 8th. That was the last time we came before you with a presentation, kind of the next steps out of that entire 8-building study that we did. And it really focused on replacement of the sheriff's substation. And at that time, we had board consensus to want to keep moving forward with that as a priority. And so in that time since, we've been busy. We issued requests for qualifications. We got 50 firms to, that request in the hands of 50 firms. We received 9 proposals. We ultimately interviewed 4 teams. These were design build teams of a builder and an architect. And ultimately, our staff committee, which was, I think there were 8 or 9 of us on the committee, that selected C2AE and Chrisman as the most appropriate team for this project. And so in that time since we finished that selection process, we've negotiated a contract that's presented to you tonight. It's a kind of a 2-phase contract because we don't know size, cost, location. There's a lot of unknowns that we need to answer. So the first phase will be working with them to figure all that out. And then we'll come back to you with we'll keep you in the loop along the way. But at the end of that phase 1, we'll know where we want to build it, how much it's going to cost, what roughly size will be, enough that we can then have a really good discussion on funding it and how we're going to go about doing that. And then their work will kind of pause until we figure out that funding. And then assuming we get that funding in place, then the same contract would carry through. We would add the rest of the design and then the construction of the completed building. So it's a all-inclusive in terms of carrying through the life of the project. But right now, the dollars that you see in here, which is about $100,000, is for this phase 1 component. So that's kind of the short story of it. I'd like to have Amy and Dennis come on up and introduce themselves and just say hello and take any questions that you have in terms of their expertise or what they can bring to the project.
I'll start by saying thank you for the opportunity and for potentially entrusting this project to us. Again, my name is Amy Scobie, previously Amy Baumer. I was married just 2 weeks ago, so you might recognize the Baumer part of it. I am a resident of Delta Township and have my kids in Grand Ledge schools, and so it's especially exciting for me to be part of a project so close to my home.
And I'm Dennis Jensen. I'm representing C2AE Architects and Engineers in Lansing, Grand Rapids, and a few other places I won't go into. And I'll be the planner and designer on this first phase and then throughout the project. And so if you have any questions, be happy to answer those for you too.
Great, thank you. Folks have questions for these guys? Andrew, the Dennis?
I have a question of Ernie, if that's okay, actually, too. Just real quickly, can you share who the other 3 proposals were that you interviewed and considered? And then I have one follow-up question to that.
Sure. The other, so like I said, four teams out of 9, we received 9 proposals. 4 teams were shortlisted for interviews. We interviewed the Chrisman C2AE team, Wheeland and Mayotte, Clark Construction and Bice, and Laux and Bergman.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And then just had a question. My understanding with design build is that you get obviously there's the efficiencies of kind of doing all that work and having the same entities kind of carry out the actual construction. So, there's that value. I believe, and I'm not an attorney, so I was looking at the contract, and I know there was a lot of language in there around change orders and that too, but I thought part of the value and some of the efficiency you get too is because you kind of lock in, once that design is done and those costs are estimated, you kind of get some guarantees. I realize pricing may change and things like that, but work-wise, you get some guarantees, so that's a value benefit to the township that we have some of that certainty with those costs and unlikelihood that those will change unless we're significantly changing the project and things like that. And I just wanted to confirm that's built into the contract.
So yeah, with a design build, situation, so going in, we, like, at this point today, we don't know if it's a $4 million building, so the benefit of having the builder on board at this phase is that as we develop these estimates, they tend to be a lot more accurate. They're done every step of design. So when we get to a number that we take to, to try to get funded, we have a high level of confidence. And so within that, then the other benefit is as they go to finalize the design, we're being cost conscious as we're making design decisions, and then we can stay to that budget. And so sometimes the builder can bring value engineering type suggestions that help achieve the same thing, at a lower cost. So that's you're never gonna take away from the change orders, because at some point they have to bid some documents, and then as things change or unknown conditions happen, you may still have it. But, without a doubt, we're gonna have a better number going in with this approach.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, sir. Ernie, my question is to you also. I know you have a staff committee that reviewed these proposals. My question is, and I recall the sheriff's office having some desire of input in the facility and its attributes and what it is able to provide the sheriff's office. So my question to you is the sheriff's office going to be consulted and their input considered in the design of this facility?
Yeah, certainly we intend to engage them. I think Brian Reed has already had some discussions with the county, with, both the sheriff's office and just the county administration to try to start to figure out what that looks like, who those people are around the table and how they impact it. Because, realistically, we certainly have to meet their needs operationally, but we're paying the bill too. So we've got to have a handle on, what's being requested and is it a need or a want type of thing. So those discussions are ongoing. But certainly we intend to bring them to the table.
Well, thank you, but to that point, would the county controller, would they, if they're not going to be financially involved in this project, why would they be at the table?
Well, I don't know if it's the controller or not. I haven't heard from Brian Reed what
Okay.
kind of where that's leading. I just know the discussions have started.
Okay. Yeah, I can follow that up with Brian when he's back, but I just want to make sure, because I had communication with the sheriff that, they had some specific desires on the design of this facility, and if it's feasible, I want to see if we can meet that expectation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ernie.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm real excited about this project and delighted to meet you. I wondered if there's been any consideration yet on, will there be any shared services that take place in this building? Any regionalism that might take place? Is there going to be a jail facility as we do now, a smaller jail facility? Are there decisions that have already been made that the designers will be keeping in mind? And then the last thing is environmental. Are we doing anything with regards to the design to address the environmental, making it, maybe some solar, I don't know, looking at all ways to address those things?
Sure. I guess what I'd say about the design decision, no decisions have been made. We're trying to come in this with a fresh set of eyes, and there's a process called programming where we'll actually Dennis would lead interviews and meetings, kind of brainstorming sessions with staff that are going to use the facility, and then he formulates all those responses and helps derive, the footprint, the size, the spacing, adjacencies. So these experts will walk us through that process. But going into it, now regarding the jail, I think at this point in time, our understanding is we're not creating any holding spaces. So that'll flush out, but I think going into it, that's the understanding. As far as the environmental efficiency, I think is what you're referring to. I can let Dennis speak to that. There's best practices, sustainable best practice design that will certainly follow, probably short of, creating a building that, might be a LEED certified. You've maybe heard that term, like our library. But that comes at a cost to obtain a certification. I mean, the board could decide we want to do that, but we're going to try to do everything we can in design anyway to keep our energy costs as low as possible with the new facility. Thank you.
I couldn't do better myself. Well, yeah, we're going to be designing as sustainable as we can afford. And you probably know this as the codes change over the years. They're forcing more green thinking into our building, guidelines. And so you'll be getting a much better building than we designed 10 years ago, just because that's what we need to do it these days. And so it's always changing and evolving for the better. But yes, we will be looking at, certainly from, the site implications, how to be sustainable and also as environmentally conscious as possible, and certainly the footprint of the building. We're interested in trying to repurpose any existing buildings that may be out there in a great location that we could reuse and save some dollars as well. And then obviously, that's the best way to be sustainable is by repurposing an old existing building rather than building a new one. So reduce that carbon footprint. So we are definitely interested in that, looking at that. It won't necessarily guide most of our decisions, but it certainly could help.
Good. I probably watch one episode too many of NCIS and Law and Order. So I was just wondering too, or are we looking to perhaps partner with some other services to be in the building? I don't know if you've looked at that. Maybe a DNA testing, something with the FBI. I don't know. I just don't know if you're looking at ideas of ways to partner and share cost.
Yeah, no, we haven't, I think, thought that far ahead. I think, we'll see what comes to the table. We have plenty of opportunity to have those discussions, I think, as we start this process.
Cool.
The other thing I'd mention, Dennis hit on, one of the nice things about, staff liked about the Crispin C2A proposal was their approach to a site selection, which I think is a big, we got to figure out where to put this building. Is it across the street where it is now, or is it somewhere else? And so thinking that through, searching for potentially a building we could reuse is a big part of it. And I thought they had a good approach, and they've actually included some services of a commercial real estate person in the area that can help us with that, some of that site selection too. So I think we've got that well covered.
And I'll just add to the sustainability piece to say that we have in-house project planning team members that will evaluate not just the first cost of the building, but the life cycle cost. And so looking at it over the course of the building's lifetime.
Thank you.
That was my question about what are the factors going into site selection, because I'm curious, are we going to stay in the same place? Are we going to find something else? So I think unless there's anything else to add, you covered it.
So are we. We're really excited.
Thank you.
Can't wait to get started.
So I thought I heard you say that there's not an anticipation for a holding area.
For what?
A holding area in this facility. My understanding in prior discussions is that was one of the top issues that the sheriff's office has had, so they didn't have to drive all the way to Charlotte and process not a prisoner, but, someone they've arrested. Are you saying that the sheriff's office no longer wishes to have a holding facility in this new building?
Dennis, my last understanding was that that wasn't necessarily the direction we're going. In no way is that set in stone either way. I mean, at this point, we're talking about trying to start this programming process, which all those discussions occur in. So if we go down that road and that, is a decision point, maybe it's a board level decision point, or maybe it's not, but that we haven't bypassed any of that. Okay. All I'm saying is my current understanding is that it wasn't needed.
Okay. That's contrary to my understanding.
Okay.
I was going to make a motion.
I just have one comment, though, first, or a question, I should say. Oh, you got a question too?
I'm good.
No, but I can call in, just say. As you know, Ernie, we got phone calls on Friday about, local unions are concerned about the project going on right now at the fire station with out-of-the-area workers who they suspect are being paid, 1099 type employees. What protections are in this agreement to ensure that local labor, prevailing wages, anything like that will be used once we get to the construction phase?
I think we have the opportunity to write those in as we go, because this is because it's a two-phase contract, we really focused on the planning and design piece of it. But with them as a partner along each step of the way, that's something that we can obviously incorporate. And Chrisman is well versed in how we do that to address those concerns.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we had that opportunity to make sure that those provisions are put in before we approve it. So if that piece will come later, then I'm okay with that.
Yep.
Karen, did you have something on the day?
No, I think you answered it. Thank you. Well, actually, so as we're going through this phase, are there going to be, I don't know if this is the correct terminology, but like sub-phases where you'll present and say, hey, this is, maybe the first part is analysis. Hey, we did, like, maybe, we looked at site selection, and then you come forward to us and then say, hey, this is where we are, and then continue to kind of establish that whole piece of the phase, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We, actually, Amy is very skilled at helping kind of work with, as an intermediary, if I'm saying it right, but between designers, project managers and end users, and elected officials like yourself. So yes, our intent is to step through this in steps. We don't want to do all our work and then bring it to you in one big proposal and say, here you go, we got to approve it. Our intent would be to say, okay, this is what we're hearing from a space needs, what the size is looking like, this is probably what that would equate to in a cost. Does that sound like something you can get behind? If so, then we start looking at what site to put it on, and then we'll come back to you. We looked at 6, 8, 10 sites, narrowed it down, and here's our top couple, and maybe a recommended one. Is there buy-in there? And if there is, then we can take it to the next step. So it would be definitely a step-through process and not saving it to the big reveal at the end.
Right, so it's a building, so to speak, building process, so.
Yeah, we want to build consensus among the entire team here as we go.
Okay.
So that when we get to the end and you say, yeah, we want to do this, and then we start figuring out how we're going to fund it.
Exactly, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, something.
Sure.
So we did have our attorney add in section 5.3.4 that at our sole discretion, we can require that the contractor pay all prevailing wage projects. So we did anticipate that would be a board concern, and our attorney drafted language to that effect, so just so everyone's aware.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you.
I did have a follow-up. Courtney, would this be an eligible project for any infrastructure grants from the pass-through that might possibly be coming down?
From what I've read about the $1 trillion one from the federal government, I didn't really see much that would be relevant. It's a lot of water, sewer,
Okay.
broadband, electric charging stations, that kind of thing.
Not public
So-
safety or anything like that?
Not that I've noticed that it could change. I don't know about any states.
Yeah.
But
Hasn't
it
passed
didn't
yet, so.
jump out
Yeah.
of anything.
Okay, thank you.
I move that the Delta Township Board contract with Chrisman for the purpose of providing design-build services for Phase 1 of the Delta Township Sheriff Substation Project at a cost not to exceed $100,850. Further, the township manager is hereby authorized to sign and execute an agreement for said services on behalf of Delta Township.
Support. There is support. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Cascarella?
Yes.
Trustee Brewer?
Yes.
Trustee Bowen?
Yes.
Trustee Mohica?
Yes.
Treasurer Fedewa?
Yes.
Clerk Clark is yes. Supervisor Fletcher?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Ernie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, great. Continuing now to item 11, Delta Township Saginaw Highway Corridor CIA bylaws. The manager's office recommends that we approve the bylaws. And we have Suzanne Schultz here, who has been our consultant throughout all this process. Welcome, Suzanne. Do you want to come up and give us an overview of the bylaws before us?
Sure. Let's open up my computer here. I'm fighting a sinus infection, so I don't have COVID. I just sound a little scratchy, though. I was on the call with the doctor today. I was like, can I fix it? He's like, no, you have to let it time take its course. So we're doing that. So the Corridor Improvement Authority is part of the act. The authority board develops the bylaws, adopts its rules, governing its procedure in the holding of regular meetings, and then it's subject to the approval of the governing body. So we presented the bylaws for the Corridor Improvement Authority to review on July 12th. And then again on August 9th to discuss some changes. There were some comments received. And so those changes were identified, or those comments were addressed in a memo to the authority and then discussed, and there was one additional change. The memo in your agenda packet talks about some of the modifications that were made to the bylaws. Of particular interest, I think, of the Township Board is the conflict of interest section. And conflict of interest, we tried to cover that as best we could with kind of what constitutes a conflict. How does the Corridor Improvement Authority Board want to treat that? So for example, they did state, and they recognize it's difficult when you have 5 out of the 9 members who are supposed to be property owners or business owners in the corridor. Everybody knows each other generally, or they have landlords, or they have, or they're located across the street. And so determining how they're potentially affected by a request or a development consideration was something that they recognized could be troublesome. But they, the Corridor Improvement Authority Board had us add in there that a member could disclose a potential conflict, and that the board then would determine amongst themselves with a vote whether or not they felt the conflict existed. And so we do provide some scenarios and typical conflict situations, which is located on page 3 at the bottom, part C1, talking about kind of what those scenarios will be. There was a question in the public comments that we received about how would someone who, if they did have a conflict then and they were recused from being able to vote or participate in the discussion, how could they possibly influence the decision by the other members? And I did want to point out that Open Meetings Act does apply to the Corridor Improvement Authority. And so you're not supposed to be having discussions outside. If there's board business to be considered in front of the board, members should not be discussing that business outside of the public hearing setting. So there should be no discussion about that. And if there is, then that does provide reason for dismissal from serving on the authority board. And so that I think is very clear. There was one change that we recognized regarding the fact that the Corridor Improvement Authority Board could come and talk to a member if there was concerns about malfeasance, misfeasance, or nonfeasance. And the original language was one member could do that. That language was changed to the executive committee, which is the chair, the vice chair, and the treasurer, the secretary, could go and talk to a member. Partly because to be able to be dismissed from service on the authority board, it does require a public hearing with the township board and public discussion, and understanding that in some cases, trying to find the full story and trying to understand the situation, there could be a whole myriad of scenarios. I mean, you're all in public office, there's always these scenarios that it does provide the executive committee then a chance to approach the individual and have a discussion before it's fully made public. The other portions of the bylaws are pretty much perfunctory about the election of officers. They did decide to have a kind of an ascendancy model where someone would serve as chair 1 year and then roll off, and the vice chair would then rise to chair. And then I also added language around past chair, so that someone, if there was a continuing project that was going on and you wanted consistent leadership, that person could continue to serve in that capacity. The bylaws identify their duties as well as kind of the conduct of meetings. And for the meetings, there was language that was changed, allowing public comment at the beginning of the meeting for agenda items to be heard in advance if there's no public hearing that's been scheduled. I think those are the big highlights. I don't know if there's any comments or questions that Township board members may have. And so for tonight, the action that's being requested is that you approve the bylaws for the Corridor Improvement Authority.
Any questions for Suzanne?
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate you responding to some of the areas of concern that I brought up before the CIA. I did sort of a lengthy analysis of the source documents that you used in composing the proposed bylaws. And the CIA did make an adjustment to one of the areas of concern I have. But I do want to let the board know I still have a couple areas of concern. I think it can be tightened up. And it's my intent, when it is an appropriate time to do so, is to offer a couple clear amendments to improve what I think the language should be in the bylaws. And the reason for this is because, let's keep in mind here, this is a public body corporate, and it is charged with statutory authorities that are well laid out. And they have pretty broad powers, but for some specific areas. And this board is going to continue on this authority well after any of us are on this board. We will be long gone, and this board will continue for any number of years. So I just want to be sure that when we set up the procedures and the bylaws and the policies that will govern the CIA, that it really be as fail-safe it can possibly be. You know, we don't want to leave it to a future board to deal with a mess, or possibly a different constitution of CIA members that may not necessarily follow the wishes of the township board unless they're formalized. So that's my motivation for doing this. And that's why I went to you and provided the CIA board that analysis and those recommendations. So I do plan on offering a couple amendments to this, and I'll explain them at the appropriate time.
Any other questions for Suzanne? Fine with it, Beth?
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. A question about the change with the, if there's a conflict of interest, that it doesn't go to just a member. I think you said now it's going to go to the executive committee, which I think is a good thing. Will that be in writing so that there is, if it needs to come before this board, will there be documentation on what that issue is? Because it could be as serious as somebody not being on the board.
Yeah, so two things. One is the general conflict of interest. If it's a matter before the Corridor Improvement Authority Board and a member finds that they do have a conflict, the board members who would not have the conflict will vote whether or not they think a conflict exists. The portion with the executive committee approaching the board member is if, let's say, it's found or if someone believes that the conduct of the authority board member was not appropriate, the executive committee could approach the person and have a conversation about why, or what happened, or they could give them a chance to remove themselves from the authority board and just resign. There was one weird court case where someone didn't do that and they insisted on staying on. And so in that case, certainly we'd want to document everything and bring it before, I mean, it's going to be an action before the board, the township board. So you would have an agenda item that would lay out the accusations. The state law requires that the person has the opportunity to be heard in a public hearing. And so as a normal course of action, you would have your normal agenda item that would likely, explain what the situation was.
And that public hearing would be here with this body, not with the Quarter Improvement Authority?
That's correct.
Okay, good. And then, if someone is not meeting the attendance requirement, because I think there's something in the bylaws
Yes.
about the number of meetings, did that attendance start counting from our very first meeting? Has that started? It's counting.
It depends on how you want to look at it. I would say it would be in effect once the bylaws are adopted.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know.
Because you do have you do have attendance issue with one member. Yeah.
Yes. And so, and then my secondary question is, if for some reason a member needs to be removed because they are not making the meetings, and perhaps their obligations changed, will there still be the original commitment in terms of, you had categories that you were trying to meet when you were selecting the board. And so I just want to make sure that the diversity and the other, that it's somebody has a business background or whatever, you had 4 or 5 great factors. Will those be taken into consideration should you have to replace somebody?
So that would be a question for the supervisor, because he makes the recommendation on you make the
But some of the
recommendation.
points Bob is making, the law still lays out, you have to have businesses and stuff, so all that remains in place. Yeah.
Yes, you still must maintain 5 members that are business owners.
And there must be a
this-
resident and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
I don't know about the diversity. I don't know if that's part of the law.
It's not part of the law.
So that's why I'm asking. Would that be part of the consideration when replacing to make sure that the board represents the community? That's it. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Yeah.
So something that you said, Suzanne, you said that if someone voted when they had a conflict of interest and that vote was recorded and became an action of the board, and then the board finds out, the CIA board finds out that someone had a conflict of interest, and that person then subsequently resigns, do we have any kind of legal recourse to retake that vote or to nullify it or anything like that?
Yeah, so on page 4, number 6, it lays out what should be done if that person took a vote and then it was found they did have a conflict of interest. So if a conflict of interest exists, but the authority board has already voted on the matter, the vote of the member who had a conflict of interest shall be void, and the recording secretary shall have the minutes reflect both the original vote and the amended vote with a notation as to why the vote was amended. If the voided vote causes the result of the authority board vote to change, either resulting in a tie vote or changing from a tie vote, then the authority board shall take another vote on the matter and engage in as much additional discussions as may be appropriate prior to such second vote.
Okay. And my second question is, I recall that when the CIA board was formed, that this board specified we wanted 9 members. We wanted the maximum number of members so that we have maximum input. And as I understand, the 9th member has not been sworn in yet. Is that correct?
What?
The 9th member of the CIA board has not been sworn in yet?
That is correct.
That is correct. So can the board act on bylaws and other things without having all of their membership initially sworn in?
I would say they still have a quorum, even if you don't have a member sworn in. That might be a question for the township attorney as to how you want to make that interpretation. But I would say there's plenty of instances where whether it's planning commission or where you don't have yet someone who's not quite sworn in yet and they haven't participated in the meeting, and the board still acts as a body and has discussion, even if that person's not, one person who's not serving currently.
In your experience, is it better, would you recommend that we wait until we fill that vacancy and we have that 9th voice on the board before the CIA board commences doing any kind of business? Or do you think that having 8 members, is sufficient? What is your experience with other CIA boards, DDA boards?
I think it's sufficient. I think if there was division among the board members, there would be greater concern.
Okay.
They seem to be, they're a great group, I have to say. I mean, the discussions they've had, they're very thoughtful. I think because they haven't taken a formal action yet, so they will have discussion on the 23rd, they'll have discussion next month, Monday. But we had planned on scheduling in September that they would actually be taking action on the development plan and TIF plan and making a recommendation to you. So ideally, if you pass the bylaws, then we're able to let that other member know that they have not, ideally, you're supposed to, if the clock gets set when the bylaws are adopted and this person hasn't shown up for 2 meetings, then you can dismiss them. But a proactive stance could be that person gets approached, once the bylaws are done, you have, can we get a letter of resignation from you so then we can appoint someone? So we could do it that way and then bring forward someone for appointment on the 7th when you meet. So by when they do the 13th, we'd have to get that person up to speed, but the 13th, it's possible, then you could have all 9.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll move that the Township Board approve the bylaws as written for the Corridor Improvement Authority. Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Let's see if there are amendments.
I do, thank you, Ben. I explained my rationale in my opening statement, but,
Somebody hand Suzanne a copy of these.
oh, yeah, there's an extra one right here. I'll explain, they're pretty simple. The First Amendment is basically to amend Article 2, say, sub 8 by inserting the language by adding or violating Article 2D2 on any matter in which a member has a conflict of interest shall constitute malfeasance of office. I did discuss this before the CIA board the other day, and this is the actual communication. And, I firmly believe that if it's egregious enough that a member knowingly votes with a conflict of interest, that upon a public hearing and a finding that constitutes malfeasance, certainly the act of communicating and attempting to influence the board members in a scenario of a conflict of interest is just as egregious. And so this would just add the communication part of a member having a conflict of interest knowingly in violation of what that section is. The Article 2D would be, shall also constitute a malfeasance of office. So I don't see this as necessarily diminishing, but it makes it clear that it rises to the level, an act of engaging in communication knowingly that you have a conflict of interest constitutes the same degree of labeling of misconduct to the level of malfeasance, in office, as does actually voting, because the two, to me, are almost inseparable. Now, either one of these, whether you vote or whether you actually communicate improperly in violation of Article 2D2, is basically the same sort of egregious conflict of interest behavior. So I see that these two should actually be inseparably combined, because they really constitute the same type of egregious offense. So I just want to make it clear, that's what the First Amendment is. The Second Amendment is at the end of Article 2D1, of where the executive committee has a discussion. Now, this will be in private. It will not be in the public viewpoint. The board will have no idea what allegations were made. We will have no idea what the outcome was. And this language just says that it would be the requirement of the executive committee to apprise the board at their next meeting the reasons for the executive committee's review of an allegation of a conflict of interest and its conclusions, so that the board may be made aware. And it may amount to nothing, or it may amount to something. But I just think the Board of Trustees really needs to be in the loop of these types of things. And all this would do is just require the executive committee, if they do have a three-person review of a member who has an alleged conflict of interest, that whatever the decision is and its conclusions should be reported to the board so they may be aware. If it amounts to nothing, that's fine. If it amounts to something, we would probably get it anyway, but this just sort of puts it in the bylaws, so it's very, very clear. So those are the two amendments that I wanted to offer. So I would so move that we adopt these two amendments to the proposed bylaws.
Is there support to them?
I'll support that.
There is support. Discussion. Suzanne, would you like to comment on these? I think the first one you said that they're covered by the Open Meetings Act, so.
It is, but I think what the amendment would do is just raise it to the penalty for doing that communication is that currently as written, it would be reported to the township board, but it doesn't rise to the level of malfeasance. So this just changes that, but I don't see any issue with that if that's what you want to have. And then the second amendment, the only concern that you might have there is that if it's a private matter, that by this, with the executive committee, the language is the executive committee may informally meet with the member to discuss the allegations. And I think part of the intent of that is to not make it kind of publicly known. If it's going to the township board as a record of what happened in the meeting, then it would be publicly known. So it's just knowing that if you are comfortable having that be the issue, then that's the case, but just keep in mind that if you wanted to keep something, personal in between that would not be publicly known, you would not be able to do that in this case with the amendment.
It kind of defeats the reason why that was put in the bylaws in the first place.
But on its face, there's nothing wrong with the amendment. I mean, if that's, just so you know, eyes wide open, that could be the result.
And what exactly gets triggered if we classify it as malfeasance of office?
So the member could be removed from office. So that then would be the penalty if they're, for example, you had a developer that you had negotiated a development agreement with who sat on the CIA board, who clearly had a conflict of interest in voting on a matter and then was recused. And if that person then came to CIA board members individually and had conversations about that particular matter in front of them. So we want to be very careful about that distinction about, is it pertaining to that, they can have a conversation, they had pizza last night for dinner. That does not mean that is a reason for malfeasance. But if it's an attempt to sway the decision, then that would be a reason for removal from office.
Yeah, if I may.
Yeah, sure. I just have a- Do you think that, like, this board, if somebody violates the Open Meetings Act, should rise to malfeasance of office? Do you think that's something that should be good just on a policy basis?
Are you asking if the township board did that?
Yeah.
So I tend to, this goes to my training, I tend to be a very bright line person on how boards and commissions are conducted, and so when I do trainings, I really believe in firewalls, so that you don't have to have that discussion and that concern. So I tend to favor, for example, if I had a city commissioner trying to talk to the planning commission, firewall. Because there's a difference between elected bodies and what elected officials can do, in my mind, and what appointed officials are expected to do. Appointed officials are not the same as public officials as far as elected. And so how an appointed body becomes influenced by elected officials or others, even being contacted by the public outside of the public realm. So for example, I never would allow planning commission emails to be made available to the public, because they're not public officials, they're appointed officials. And so I tend to be very bright line about how those discussions occur and how the Open Meetings Act is designed for public discourse, even if it's uncomfortable conversations, but having it in the public view. So I personally think it could apply to any board or commission, and that the reason for The debate is so that the public has that transparency.
Thanks. And you spoke to it, Dennis, so did anybody else want to have a question before we let Dennis speak twice on his amendment?
About the amendments?
What was that?
About the amendments,
The
you're asking?
amendment,
Yes, I had a question for
Sure,
Suzanne.
yep. We'll go with Beth and then Mary.
What could be personal in a conflict of interest? You said if someone had something personal in a conflict of interest and you didn't want to make it public, isn't conflict of interest, it's defined as like business interest and money and that sort of thing. What kind of personal issue could there be that would cause a conflict of interest and then someone wouldn't want made public?
I think it's always hard. I can't think of a direct example to give to you. I think one of the challenges is that lives can be messy and people can make bad choices, and sometimes they make bad choices without really thinking about what they did. And so I kind of what that grace is you want to give somebody without it being, it's just, I think just having been in public life enough to know that sometimes those things happen. Bad things happen to good people make bad choices, that stuff happens. And so that was the only concern. From a legal standpoint, there's nothing wrong with the amendment as proposed. I mean, I think it's totally fair. It's just acknowledging that could happen. And then just being aware that that's a possible thing where it could be uncomfortable in the future. But odds are you'll never have to use this in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mary, Fonda?
Suzanne, were these amendments discussed by the CIA board in their discussion over bylaws?
So the CIA board, I would have to defer to the supervisor on that because unfortunately I could not attend and be part of the second discussion. When we discussed it for the first discussion, we hadn't received yet Dennis's letter. So I did provide the written response, but I don't know if you can fill in.
It was
Mr. Fletcher.
discussed again, Dennis was at that meeting as well, and Brian did walk through your review and your recommendation.
So the CIA board did discuss it, was presented with it, discussed it, and chose not to make these changes. I just wanna be-
We made one change that was based on.
But not these two.
but these
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know, was this language proposed to them?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
No.
But the concept was, just for clarity. No, you didn't present the concept?
The concept.
Well, if you didn't present the language, did you present the concept?
He presented his concerns.
Yeah, my
and
concerns.
Suzanne's
Okay.
response to his concerns was presented, but there were no amendments offered.
Okay,
Nothing
thank you.
specific.
Done, Mary?
Yes, I am, sorry.
Fonda?
Thank you, Supervisor Fletcher. I'm wondering if it was presented back to the Township Board, and as you said, it could be something of a personal nature. I mean, it's hard to come up with a
Yeah.
scenario right now. If the wording that it should be presented at a closed meeting,
Does the open meetings?
I don't know if that's allowed, I'm just saying,
Not sure.
and then a determination can be made if that's something that should move forward in a different direction, just throwing something out.
Well, and if it's something sensitive, I mean, you could have the attorney say it could be addressed in a closed meeting. I mean, that's a good, that would, if, again, it depends on what the situation is, but that could be a scenario that you could see happen. But I don't think you would need to specify it in this language. I think it would be dependent upon the situation.
Thank you.
Other questions on the amendment? And Suzanne, well, these, if we did amend it tonight, would it then have to go back to the CIA board for them to review and consider the changes to it? No.
I would say no. I mean, ultimately, they recommend and you approve. So if you decide to amend, then that's what the bylaws would be. I don't imagine that the group would be opposed strongly to the language. We would definitely want to share it with them on the 23rd, just so that they know what the amendments were. And if they had any objections, we can certainly come back and request a reversal or something, but I don't anticipate it would be an issue.
Yes.
Thanks, Ken. Just a point of clarification, if The executive committee had an allegation, and it was sort of indiscretion, and it was not egregious, and it did not rise to the level of disciplinary action. A report doesn't have to state the member's name. It just said there was an allegation. The executive committee reviewed this. We found that it did not rise to the level of any action by the executive committee or action by the board. But it would put the Board of Trustees on notice that, you know, the executive committee did have to review such a proceeding. It had to initiate such a proceeding. If, however, the executive committee found that there was a substantive infraction of the bylaws, then it would come before the Board of Trustees and it would be made public.
Correct.
So that's the difference. It's really the discretion of the executive committee. And there would be no personally identifiable information that has to be provided. It's just that, you know, there was an allegation, it was found to be unsupported, for example, but the board did take it seriously, the executive committee rather, and we found that it had no standing. You know, that's the type of thing that differentiates something that really is like maybe, you know, someone just made a dumb mistake and it wasn't, and some other person made a formal complaint to the executive committee, and so they were obligated to look at it, but they found that it didn't have any substance. And that's the kind of report that would come before the Board of Trustees. You know, it wouldn't have to include any names because they had no substance. Conversely, if it was a serious breach of a conflict of interest, it would go through the normal process.
Yeah, it'd be public anyway. Yeah, I like that.
Andrea?
To that point, I guess I'm just wondering, does the language as proposed allow for that, or do we need to clarify that on the report? If it's, you know, those two variations of reporting. And it seems to me it might just be cleaner to be explicitly clear about that, but.
It's up to the executive committee, to be honest with you. Their findings.
But I guess I'm just thinking further down the road, years later, if they don't have the benefit of this immediate conversation, that clarity might be helpful, that they know they can have an informal conversation, determine there was no issue, report generically to the board and satisfy this requirement and not be required to publicly disclose that individual and that. So it just may, as we're thinking longer term and further out, it may be helpful to be very clear about that. Just so our intent and the options the executive committee have are explicit.
So you could say the result of the executive committee's findings are not required to identify the individual board member where it is found where it is found that allegations are unsubstantiated or inconclusive?
Or do we say unless it is found that allegations are substantiated and conclusive? I don't know if it matters either way. I'm just saying the same.
Supervisor Fletcher? Can I just say something? I don't know if there's a policy manual or procedures. So it could address these details of how this will be incorporated. So it doesn't need to be at this high level.
Yeah.
If there are procedure manuals associated with, or policies and procedures associated with the bylaws, I didn't know if that would help.
Do you
But I
have?
agree with, what you were saying.
Yeah.
Andrea.
It's kind of like it's a procedure manual. So do you have for your other bodies, like procedures, rules and procedures? No.
We do.
No. I'm struggling with part of this because we're holding the CIA board to a level we don't hold ourselves to. And I struggle with that.
We need to fix that.
There are 5 business people that have potential financial conflicts of interest on this.
There are 7 board members who have potential financial conflicts on every vote we take, or potentially any vote we take, I should say. So I just struggle that we're we're holding another body to a level we don't hold ourselves to. I have an issue with that.
You have a problem with their attendance record then?
I'm talking about a conflict of interest malfeasance, which was your first one, and that's kind of,
You were
I mean,
talking
we're
two different
talking.
standards, Mary, between this board and the CIA board.
What's the
I think
difference?
we're getting a debate. We
We
don't
are.
have debates. We have individuals taking one at a time speaking, so. Do you have more you want to say, Mary?
No, I'm struggling with
Sure.
this. That's all I want to say.
Is there any more discussion on the amendment?
I like what you're saying, Mary, and I don't have a problem with being held accountable for that as a trustee, as a board member here. So perhaps that's something we can look at for us as well. I don't disagree, but I think I wouldn't not do this because it's not in place. I would say, let's look at putting something like that in place for us as well. Good point.
Yes.
Well, we could take a vote as is, or we could just take a couple-minute recess and have Suzanne draft up another clarifying sentence for this amendment, if it's the desire of the board.
Is that the desire of the board to take a couple-minute recess? So Suzanne, you know.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, there, Karen.
So going back to somebody's, this hasn't been presented to the CIA board, right?
No, the CIA approved the bylaws and now sent it to us for our approval.
Right.
So they've already decided to approve the bylaws as drafted.
So to include this is where we're at, right? To include this part?
This will be included, yes, if this is voted on, it will become part of the bylaws.
Right, but the CIA board, have they seen this part, is what I'm asking?
Well, they've seen Dennis's concerns, they haven't seen this amendment.
So aren't we always talking about transparency? I mean, do they have to see it, or, and I'm sorry, I'm not very clear on that. Do they need to look at it before it comes back to us? We can say, okay, they've, so maybe I just need a little clarity on that.
Well, Suzanne said that we can approve the bylaws with changes and it would then go into effect because the CIA board is making a recommendation to us and we make the final decision. So we do have the authority to change them if we want to.
And we would certainly report back to them the changes so that they would be aware of it, and they could always provide comment back to the township board if there was a concern.
So do you have any clarification language?
I would say, unless it is found that allegations are valid, the result of the executive committee's findings need not identify the authority board member in question.
There you go.
Could you repeat that, please?
Unless it is found that allegations are valid, the result of the executive committee's findings need not identify the authority board member in question.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
So you're making a friendly, I guess instead of friendly amendment to the.
Yeah, that'd be, well, I make a friendly amendment to my amendment. Is there a second? I'm sorry.
Support, second, I think I support.
If it's accepted as a
She has
friend.
to accept it.
I accept it.
Yeah, she accepts it, so we'll take that as a friendly amendment to the amendment. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, Madam Clerk, call the roll on the amendment.
Okay, is it one or both? Yeah.
What was that?
Is it one amendment or both of them?
Well,
You made it as one.
amendment, So it's one vote.
Okay. Treasurer Fedewa,
Yes.
Trustee Brewer,
Yes.
Trustee Bowen,
Yes.
Trustee Cascarella,
Yes.
Trustee Mojica,
Yes.
Clerk is Yes. Supervisor Fletcher?
Yes. And now we are back to the bylaws as amended. Is there any additional discussion? Dennis?
No amendment for the benefit of the board, but I just wanted to clarify one of the concerns that I brought before the CIA, and that was regarding the recording of their minutes, you may recall. The response was basically, well, they don't have the authority to do anything like that. It's basically the Township Board of Trustees. I disagree with that. The authority is a public body corporate, and it's actually authorized to possess all the powers necessary to carry out its purpose under statute. And any power shall not be construed as a limitation on the general powers of the authority. That's actually from the statute. When it comes to section 608, and the proceedings and rules of the board are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And the Open Meetings Act, as we know, is the taking, recording, and retention of minutes. And those are at a minimum of what we've discussed before is what minutes are as the official record. But again, that's the minimum. And again, this is a public body corporate. And nowhere in the statute of the powers of the CIA board does it say that the Board of Trustees, it has to get approval by the Board of Trustees. This is in the minutes, obviously, or excuse me, this is in the bylaws. So I just want to point out something before we vote on this, because I think there's additional action that we may have to take as a township with the CIA. There are a number of powers that the CIA has that requires approval by the Board of Trustees. And quickly they are the adoption of rules, which are these bylaws, development plans, tax increment finance plans, special levy assessments, an annual budget, and they cannot use township funds, borrow money or issuance of its notes, borrow money and issuance of its negotiable revenue bonds, and employ and compensate an authority director. That requires Board of Trustee approval. However, as far as the administrative part, that isn't defined by the Board of Trustee approval. Section 609 says the board, and when I say board, I'm talking about the CIA board, not the governing board, may employ and fix the compensation of a treasurer. The board may employ and fix the compensation of a secretary. The board may retain legal counsel. The board may employ other personnel considered necessary by the board. So these are the powers that are authorized in state statute to the CIA board, of which we do not have any control, other than maybe the power of persuasion. So I would like us to have a discussion and maybe a consensus that maybe the township needs to enter into an agreement, with the CIA that what the type of administrative services that we will be providing for them, and that is, doing their budget and the things that we've talked about before. They were just assumed before, but like I say, we aren't always going to be here, and then there might be another board, and these are the inherent powers that are vested in the CIA board. And so we can't control that unless we have an agreement, a formal agreement with the CIA of what we will do for them, and that becomes a binding agreement. So I just think staff needs to think about advising the board of what we should do to make those types of centralized administrative services very clear, so we can be assured that, nothing will come off the rails sometime down the road.
Hey, Suzanne, since you deal with these and stuff, this board must approve a budget of the CIA.
That is correct.
So if the CIA wanted to pay the treasurer, this board would have to approve that in the budget. You can't pay them if it's not in the budget. If the CIA wanted to hire an attorney, that would have to be a budgeted item that this board approved. So if we did not approve it, they won't be able to hire an attorney. If the CIA board wanted to hire additional staff, that would be in the budget. So if we have to approve that budget, then we could reject that and say we don't approve the hiring additional staff. So they're really is no authority of the CIA board that this body would not have a review over through the budgeting process on the specific items that Treasurer Fieldwell raised.
Correct, you do review you authorize their budget. There are, though, also service agreements that happen between DDAs or CIAs and the local jurisdiction. So it could be an increased level of maintenance that the CIA decides to take on, and you've established what your base is as the township. It could be the use of the accounting to do the accounting for them instead of hiring a CPA. So there are some of those reciprocal agreements where it does define that, and I can pull an example of that if you're interested. That does exist. So both you approve the budget, but also you can also approve kind of what your terms are going to be as the township. And you'll notice when we get to the discussion about kind of what the percentages are, we did identify the administrative fees to cover any costs that the township might bear in the administration of the Corridor Improvement Authority, so that you are not having that come out of the general operating fund.
And I'm fine with having agreements. I think those are fine. I just wanted to make the point that we do have more control over their operations on all that stuff if we approve the budget.
If someone did want to volunteer and just cause mischief, but I just think it's clear when you have a separate public body corporate that you have these, mutual aid agreements, if you will. So make it clear before, succeeding CIA members as well as other Board of Trustee members exactly who does what and what the terms are. And so it's more of a formal agreement. I just think it would be in the township's best interest as a whole that we consider thinking about doing something along those lines.
Yeah, generally it's pretty seamless if you have township staff doing both. Where you start to see the bigger distinctions is when you have a hired director and they now have their own staff and and they're leaning on the township for certain services. So it gets depending on how much money they have and the functions that they're doing, it becomes more common for those agreements to happen.
So would that budget oversight also give this board oversight over them issuing bonds?
Yes.
And purchasing property and that sort of thing? Because I remember those being on that list too.
Yeah, there's very
sure.
specific, there's even a whole section on like if they're going to bond, what they have to do, and it requires your authority.
Okay, great.
Other discussion on the bylaws? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Supervisor Fletcher,
Yes.
Trustee Mohica,
Yes.
Treasurer Fieldwell,
Yes.
Trustee Cascarilla,
Yes.
Trustee Brewer,
Yes.
Trustee Bowen.
Yes.
Oh, Clerk Clark is yes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And thank you, Suzanne. We appreciate your work that you continue to do on all this.
Just to marry that so you have that specific language.
Thank you.
I've learned how to do this.
Well, great, Suzanne. We appreciate it. Alana, do you have anything in our manager's report for us?
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. Last week, as we all know, we received heavy rain over a very short period of time, and looking at all 5 of our rain gauges around town, we actually recorded 5.04 inches of rain at the Snow Road Booster Station. The wastewater treatment plant did experience high flows, but staff was able to avoid any major problems. Manager Reed has also been checking in with Representative Whitwer. They're hoping to have the state budget completed by mid-September. Right now, it looks like GM is going to resume production beginning next Monday, August 23rd. And then Michael Armitage, the director of Eaton County Central Dispatch, is leaving August 30th to join the Calhoun County Central Dispatch. And then last week, we reported that we didn't receive any green money in our SRF award. Staff did check with Eagle and found that it was a statewide decision to use up all of its allocated principal forgiveness for disadvantaged communities, which Delta Township doesn't qualify for. So we're going to continue to watch the federal infrastructure bill and see if there's any potential for some principal forgiveness within that. And then we actually have a new face in our audience today. As we mentioned last week, we have a new assistant fire chief, and if you want to come up and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name's John Kaler, and I'm very happy to be your new Assistant Fire Chief. And I look forward to working with the chief to continue the good work the fire department provides to the community.
Our condolences.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you on board.
Thank you.
And that's
Sorry,
all I
Chief.
have for my report.
Any questions around that? At the beginning of the meeting, Dave said he was here to brighten our meeting. Does the board feel that he brightened our meeting this evening?
I need my sunglasses.
Can we do a roll call?
We'll just have that be a unanimous consent. And we don't have any items for committee of the whole, so any other final public comment this evening from the audience? Seeing nobody who's not staff, we'll go to the board now, find them.
No, I just wanted to share that there will be a chicken wing festival. It just doesn't get any better than that for me, sorry. But there's a chicken wing festival on September 4th and 5th at Adado Riverfront Park downtown Lansing. It's a great event, and the founders are supporters of breast cancer awareness, and they started this as a way of fundraising for that. And it has just grown. I mean, there's 6,000-7,000 people that now attend that. So if you get a chance, please attend. I will be there. And there's a website, it's MichiganChickenWingFestival.com that can give you more information.
Okay, we'll see you then. Seeing no further business before us, we are adjourned.
No, the state